Welcome to the IronTrap Garage podcast.
Hello, everybody.
Mike, Matt, and we got Moondog on the couch with us, of course.
Moondog's on the couch. He seems to dig the podcast.
He just likes the extra attention because we're sitting down.
Yeah.
Right?
So today's podcast is going to be an interesting one where we seem to come up with topics off the top of our head last minute or whatever, but they all kind of organically come up in our good discussions that we have.
Before we get to the topic, I talked about it last week, but we'll keep harping on it until it happens. Black Friday, 15% off sale across the whole website, parts and merch and stuff. We're getting a humongous order of t-shirts and sweatshirts. So if we've been out of stock for a little while, some stuff. So if you're looking to get some, Black Friday, they'll be in stock. Calendars will be up for sale as well on Black Friday. Head to the website Friday through Monday, 15% off. That's the biz part of the intro.
Yeah, buy some stuff.
Yeah, Moondog needs treats.
He does. He's very hungry, too. And of course, typical deal, subscribe, all that good stuff. This is a audio-only version. As a reminder, we do every other week. We do a video. We do a podcast every week, but we do a video version, which is hosted on our YouTube channel. So you can go there, check that out. And that's all the bookkeeping stuff out of the way. And so we'll get in.
Are you stuck?
Moon is constantly a distraction.
That was the funniest I've ever seen that happen.
So today's discussion is, it's one we get, and some of these podcasts ideas come from just emails we get or people that we talk to at events. And now that we've been doing this a little while, not very long in the grand scheme of things, but we've messed with enough of these cars that people that are just getting into it are asking us for advice, which seems crazy to me because I was the one asking advice not too long ago.
But for the amount of time that we've been doing it, we've pumped out a lot of cars.
Yeah, we've worked on and found and done, we have fit a lifetime of experience in like a short time.
5 years,
or longer. So basically, one question we a lot of times get, people will be looking for a project car. Maybe they just got a car that they found, and it's like, well, what do I do with this car? Or what direction I want to take it? Or sometimes people will email us and say, hey, I got this car, insert picture here, and then I want to do the X with it. And there's times where we're like you're, maybe it would have been easier to start with another car or something like that. So we often get asked, why didn't we paint this car? Or why did you do this to this car? Or, it's just, we get that general broad questions, and it's hard to answer sometimes, but I thought we'd at least cover a little bit of the rationale with in this podcast. So first of all, the big thing is say you found a car, or you saw a car on Facebook Marketplace, or think you might have to go purchase it or look at it. A lot of times for me, it is, does the car have the look? So is the car, if it's an all original untouched car, does it have a cool look to it? Is it good old paint, or what's the condition? Or in the case of old hot rods and customs, were the modifications kind of cool? Does it have the right silhouette, for lack of a better term? And that for me is really the deciding factor on what cars we actually work on, I should say. We will buy cars if they're a good deal, but sometimes you'll see that we'll just pass them on right away because maybe it just doesn't connect with me.
Doesn't have the instant itch to work on it.
Yeah, but some of them, you look at them and you just know. So what I struggle, with a lot of people struggle with, and we get messages about, it's like they send us a car and then they tell us what they want to do with the car, and it's like totally, you're like swimming upstream. Like it's just a battle, because you're taking a car and trying to do something with it that it wasn't, or it would be very difficult to do. So buying a car that is a rusty, broken in half piece of shit, much like I did with the Free T, and making it nice is an uphill battle. And much like all the older guys told me when I started on that car, it does not make sense. Buy a nicer car. And I can agree, it does. Now, the little caveat there is if you want to learn, or it's all you can afford, or in the instance of the T, I was trying to push myself to build, majority of a car from scratch. And I just wanted the challenge, so to speak. That was kind of a learning exercise.
And the free T is also a one-off because it's not like a normal Roadster body. It's the back half of a touring car.
Right.
Has a driver's door, which a T of that year did not. So it's a little bit of a gray area per se.
Yeah, but I started with a car that was way, I could tomorrow go buy a touring and do the same thing that's not rotten. That's actually pretty nice.
Yeah, that's valid.
And could have built something quicker and easier. Now, I think that car, that's what makes sometimes these cars so special. That over the years of me following different builds, seeing guys that have taken cars that were, for instance, doing 3-window conversions out of a 4-door and stuff like that. Like
that boggles my mind still to this day.
It's just
the amount of work involved to turn it into a 3-window.
Yeah, and it's the same idea. Like if you have the money or you're just trying to build a car, it makes a lot more sense just to buy a 3-window. Just wait. Patience is the most difficult thing, and I struggle with it every day. It's like you want to find that car and get started on it, and so you buy the first thing that you think might possibly be what you want, and then at 3 years, 5 years, 25 years down the road, you're still effing with the car, and it's
the free T is a prime example for that.
Yeah. Now the free T, I will say in my defense, I started out saying we were just going to make it a rough, like dirt racer type car, and then it became a nice car. And because of that, I will say that the build process made it even harder because I changed, mid-project going into making a nice car, and I would have done it a little differently that, wouldn't have had, like I still have to go back into that car and change a bunch of stuff because I wasn't thinking of drivability or, just different things I did to it that now if I knew I was building a nice car from the beginning, I probably would have thought a little differently about it. So that's how it goes. But I think when you're looking at, buying a project or starting on a project, you really need to decide ahead of time. And I do this with a lot of these cars. What is the car you want to build? So like understanding when it comes to traditional hot rods and customs, what is the era or style that you're building? Now I think we have people that follow us that are into all types of cars, so muscle cars, whatever. So it's a little different if you're building a restoration type car, but what are you trying to do with it? So if it's a restoration, you're trying to buy a 70 Chevelle and build a beautiful restoration, you want to win like a points judging car, you're going to probably be picking a different car than if you just want a car to take to the cruise in and you don't really care about numbers matching. So like for me, building hot rods and customs, it's what is the car I want to build. So if I want to build a let's say it's a West Coast style, I use that term loosely, but like a highboy 32.5 window, starting with a channeled, East Coast style cobbled together car, you're kind of going against, it just makes it way more difficult to do that. So then you have to cut everything out, raise it up, undo all the work they did, where it'd be a lot smarter just to buy an original or stock car, I should say, stock type car, or a car that's a highboy and go from there. But if you have to do like half a lifetime's worth of work just to get it back to stock,
like we did with my Cabriolet.
Yes, it's a lot.
As you were saying this, I was like, "Holy shit, we did that with my car."
Yeah, and that was a good example of you wanted a 34, and you didn't want to spend 34 money, so that was what was available for affordable.
Yep.
And I think your car is a good example of it was a learning process, getting your feet wet, and also like a stepping stone. So a lot of times when you build these cars, if you're into this for the long run, you're buying a car, and your first car may be a car you build, you drive for a little while, and then you hope to sell for some money to buy what you really want. And then, so that was I think with us, that was the conversation we had.
Oh, definitely.
In the beginning. And I think in the long run, it makes you getting one of those builds under your belt kind of you know what is involved,
Yep.
and you'd probably look differently at the next one. To
Definitely want to buy a car that's on a chassis already that isn't flat pack and a pile of panels.
Yeah, that's your free tee.
Yes.
Yeah, so
It'll never be as nice, but it's my free tee.
Yeah, that's the good example of that. So, but I think, and again, it all goes back to the money you have and the time you want to spend. So, there's definitely instances where, that rule doesn't apply. But if you're looking at, and another thing I see is like people are, when you're buying a car that maybe is a project that's midstream, people buy it and they're trying to do something different than the other person was doing with the car, and you have to undo all kinds of work. Or like right now, it's very, very popular to do the hard chop, rolling bones,
Yep.
Bonneville style hot rod. And very cool. I'm not saying anything that they're not cool, but a lot of people are not built for those types of cars.
I'm guilty of that.
Well, you could fit in some of those cars that are built right, but there's guys that heavy set, tall, heavy set.
I'm headed that direction.
You're heading that direction. Give it 10 or 15 years, you might be there. But heavy set, tall, and
bad back.
Yeah, and a bad back, and you're trying to get in a heavily chopped, raw hot rod. They look cool and everything, but like those are cars that might not be the best for you, and there might be a reason. Now, again, if that's what you want, or you have, much like myself, have multiple cars, so it's like that car might be cool, and you only drive it once in a while, and it's not as big of a deal, and you drive your custom, when you're going other places. But
it is also funny when people build a hot rod for the first time, or like an older car, and then they drive it and they're like, these things drive really poorly. It's like, yeah, that's kind of how they were. They weren't like a brand new Cadillac. They didn't ride well.
Yes.
They didn't steer well. They're old, junky, engineering. It wasn't made to ride nice back then. The roads sucked.
Yeah, we do get that a little bit from people that put a car together in an old, a nostalgic or traditional way, and then they hit us up, and it's like, well, how do I get the car to not wander going down the highway? And it's like, well, what do you have for tires? Oh, bias plies. They look cool. It's like, well, they're going to do that. Luckily, they've started coming out with, like bias look radials.
Yep.
And depending on how snobby you are, some people still don't like them. But regardless of your opinion, they're going to drive nicer. They're going to ride like everything about them is going to be better. So if that's what you want to do with the car, it's back to that same thing. If you want to be doing cross country drives in your hot rod, then those types of tires are probably better suited. Or you need to know that your car is going to be wandering around the highway and following every groove and everything in the road. So that's just the stuff that going into it, it's always good to ride in a car with someone. If you have a friend that'll let you drive their old hot rod or custom, just so you understand what it's like.
Yeah.
Because it is so different than driving even a 50s car, or even a late 40s car is so much different.
Yeah.
Even the difference between driving a 30, let's say a 37 and newer Ford, 37 to 40 versus a 32 or a Model A is just like totally different. So that's a big part of it. But the kind of the basis of this podcast was more people asking us, like when we get cars, why do you decide you're going to strip the paint and uncover the original paint underneath?
Or why didn't you just strip it to bare metal and just respray the whole car?
Right. And I don't know where I first heard the term, the saying that we use of let the car speak to you. That I think is the real, that's the short answer. If I just wanted to make this a 5-minute podcast, I'd just say, let the car speak to you.
Yeah.
Do whatever the car's telling you. So a lot of times when we get the car, I start working on it, and the car kind of tells you what it needs or what it wants. So the Schroll Car, the 32.5 window with the olds, that thing was all in black primer, and it had a little bit of color showing through, but it looked really rough. It did not look like cool shitty. It wasn't perfectly shitty. It was just shitty.
Yeah.
So that car, I was like on the fence with it, what to do with it the whole time. And then one day, we were already kind of working on it, and we knew we wanted to keep the look basically the same, the silhouette. And I just started rubbing the one door where there was a little bit of green paint off, and I'm like, wow, this paint will come off pretty easily with like some acetone and a rag. Holy crap. And so I just started working a little bit at it, and then next thing you know, I'm uncovering it, and then we saw the numbers on the door, and then it's like, okay, well, that's hard to recreate. So I think that car is one that's like borderline, because I had to patch a lot of big sections on the side of that car and blend the old lacquer paint in. But I think it goes back to a statement one of my friends said to me along the way with doing the DeLorean car. It's like, well, anybody can have especially with Roadsters, anybody could have a Brookville Roadster and paint it shiny black, louver the hood kind of the same, and you could have 18 cars that look the same as yours at the LA Roadster show or wherever you go, a big event. And I'm like, yeah.
And no one would be any wiser that it's a the majority of people, I should say, would be none the wiser that it's a Brookville car. It'll look the same sitting next to it for the most part.
Or that it has the history that it has. So like for us, obviously a big part of this whole, for me at least, for a big part of this hobby is the old hot rods and customs and finding them and fixing them and refining them. But those cars have like all this history behind them. So like, but if you totally restore that car and you park it next to another car that was done recently out of a Brookville car, you wouldn't know the difference unless I forcefully told you the story. Yeah. So I just love the fact that when you roll into somewhere with one of these cars that has some age to it, everybody just loses their mind because it's the real deal. It's not a...
And I think it brings more questions.
Yes.
People want to know, well, why does it look like that? What have you done to it? Where did you find it? Whereas you roll in with not saying a perfect car, but a nice shiny black paint car, they may not start asking questions because it just looks like it was a car you built and painted.
Yes, yeah, it just looks like every other, well done 32 Roadster.
And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just the style of, preservation, for a lack of a better term, would be, it makes people think and ask questions and just more curiosity of why is that car like that?
Yeah, and for me, that's always been the fun part of hot rods and customs, old hot rods and customs, is that the cars were so vastly different. Every person was building a car to what they thought was cool, and some of them did a good job, some of them didn't. But in the modern take on traditional hot rodding or nostalgia hot rodding, it's even more trend based than I feel like it was back in the day. So
100%.
You look at the big popular shows and the cars that are at those shows, and 90% of the cars are a certain style or built a certain way, which is super cool. But for me, the quirkiness of these different old cars is what excites me. That the car was channeled in this way, or they put this engine in, or they did this quirky bracket. And I don't think you can ever, with a water jet cut or a CNC made part, I don't care how traditional you make your car look, you cannot beat a handmade part. And that's one thing I'm very, very passionate about, is like the handmade pieces. Yes. And we get that question a lot too on the channel. Like, well, why didn't you just like go to a CNC guy and get that part made? And it's like, I could have, certainly. We have friends very close to us that do that type of work and could have it done and whatever. But like, what makes these cars special is all the weird one-off handmade parts. Is what is really cool about them. And a lot of the high-end shops that are building nostalgia or traditional, in quotation, cars, like some of the cars that are doing America's Most Beautiful Roadster. It's like, it's in a nostalgic, traditional theme, but like when you look at the car, it's like, holy shit, everything was like, it's no different than they're just they're painting the car a more pleasing color, and they're maybe using a flathead instead of a different engine, but like all the stuff is like, it's just too perfect. It's not. It takes.
It's basically street roddy and a nostalgic take.
Yeah,
everything's perfect and
it's awesome.
It's beautiful.
beautiful,
cars.
and it's perfect, and it's probably nicer than anything I could build. But what draws me to this part of the little corner of the hobby is the handmade, one-off style of these cars that were built back in the day, and that's why I like chasing the real deal. And even if it's putting more work in than probably starting with another, copying it, that's where I think it's a good idea. Back to what do you do with a car? If you're finding an old hot rod and you love that it's an old hot rod and what it looks like in the silhouette, that's why you're buying that car. That's why that car is worth way more work than if you just started with a United Pacific or a Brookville body. That's why it makes sense to do that, because you can't replicate that stuff. It's very difficult to do that. So like the Schroll Car, there was a lot of quirky angle iron brackets and the way the wishbones were done, and the stuff's like borderline sketchy but very unique and quirky. And so for me, it was going around and just refining the stuff a little bit, going over some of the welds to make sure that it's safe, and doing some of that stuff, but like not stripping all those little pieces off the car. And like I think a lot of people have a difficult time in restraint in doing that. They go down the rabbit hole of making it too clean and perfect, and getting rid of all those handmade parts that makes
and that's what makes it look like it was built in the 50s.
Yes.
You get rid of all that stuff and it just blends in with someone built it recently.
Mm-hmm. So I think that's where, like, if you're trying to figure out what to do with a car, that's where some of the cars you will see us put this incredible amount of work into a car that's pretty rough, or whatever, to get the car to turn around. It's because it's the real deal old custom or hot rod, and we're trying to save that. Now, if you're just starting with, you just want to build a 32.5 window and you want a clean slate, well, then that's where you don't want to probably pick a car like that, because you're just gonna take all of its soul away. And that's a thing that I think in previous years of this hobby, you see that, and it kind of kills me. Like recently, there's a guy, I think on Facebook, I see him post occasionally, an older gentleman. He has a 32 Roadster that was like an old hot rod, and he posts photos all the time of his car and how it was built in the 50s, and he shows photos when he found it, and it had like old black paint on it. It was cool, and he red oxide primered the whole thing, and like just kind of got rid of the
look.
Yeah, the look. And it's like the silhouette's still there for sure, but like to me, the red oxide primer didn't really look any better than if he would have just dolled up the old black paint a little bit.
I can't imagine how many street rods had some amazing past look, and then in the 70s and 80s that wasn't as cool,
right?
So they were like, oh, let's turn this into a street rod. There was probably so many great hot rods that were lost and turned into a quirky 80s street rod, and just pains me to think about.
Yeah, there's probably a lot of historic cars that were lost to time because of that, because people just bought the car, had it media blasted, stripped everything off, threw everything away, and they started fresh. And that part's a little difficult to think about, but that was the trend back then, and that's how it is. But nowadays, it's you want to think a little harder about it, because I think I am very happy that I feel like the hobby has been morphing in the past 10 or 15 years, and people are more appreciative of original type cars, or cars with age to them. And because they're so unique, they'd prefer to buy that over you see generally historic type cars or survivor type cars are selling a lot quicker than like a Brookville car that's all super nice and was redone. Sometimes the old perfectly shitty car sells quicker because it's so unique. That's what people want. And there's always going to be a crowd that's going to want the perfect car. Mm-hmm. Nothing wrong with that. I love them too. But so I think when you're thinking about that, that's back to what I was saying. The first thing is figure out what you want to do with the car. What style do you want to build it in? What level of finish do you want to take it to? And decide if that's the car. Also, deciding on what body style or what car do you actually want. That's another thing I see happen too often, is that people are like, they really want a 32.5 window. That's the car they've always lusted after, and they buy a Model T 4-door.
I was guilty of this too.
Yeah.
I always wanted a C10, and I settled for a 90 Chevy pickup because I couldn't afford a C10, and then I never finished it because I didn't really care that much.
Yeah, if it's not the car you're really excited about, and I get money is always an issue, but like some people go so far left field, or it's like they wanted a Roadster, and then they end up with a 1926 Dodge Brothers 4-door sedan. And it's like so far from what, like, so at least if you want a 32.5 window, try and get as close as you can get to it. I mean, that's what happened with me with the Pagoda City Coupe. I would have loved to have a 32.5 window, but I couldn't afford or find one at the time. So I found a 3031 Coupe that's as close as I could get.
31 5 window?
Yes.
As everyone calls it sometimes.
Yeah. So I found a coupe that was, as close as I could get. And, I went from there. So that is, and then as things progressed, then I got my 32, but it was like, so I think that's the thing. Try and at least find something that's close to what you want. But when you don't just settle for the 4-door sedan that because the guy's your next door neighbor and has it sitting in the woods. If that's not what you really wanted, you only have so much life in you. So the more life you waste on cars that you don't even have any interest in, just because it's kind of like, it baffles me.
It's wasted time and energy.
Yeah.
For sure.
So figuring out what you want to do, what style, all that stuff is perfect. So like a good example is we have that 38 convertible we've been working on, and I love that car. I always kind of admire, like, there's been a handful of them that have been done in recent years that I think look kick-ass, that are being customized, guys on the West Coast have done, and they look phenomenal. I was in love with how those cars looked, but it was like, it's such a rare body style. I kind of wrote off finding one that was right or a good deal to customize my own way. And then we came across this one that we found, and for me, it was kind of perfect because it was an old, like, I don't know. I don't even know what I want to call it, a custom, but it was
like just a high school hot rod.
Yeah, it was an old high school hot rod, for lack of a better term, and was already heavily modified. It had stuff filled, and it had a different engine in it, and the interior was, different, and, it was crude, but it had all the, like, elements that I would have liked, and it had that cool, unique 38 standard or 38 deluxe or 39 standard front end. They're both very similar. That style, very Art Deco, I loved. And so it was like kind of perfect. It's like, okay, well, this one's already like an old hot rod or custom. I don't necessarily love all the stuff that they did. The silhouette isn't what I would do, but like we're not starting with like a perfect, like, because I wanted to cut this car up. So like I didn't want to start, we kind of like the Rowan Roadster was like, I wasn't starting with a car like that, and I was going to chop the roof off and do all this stuff. So like this car was perfect because it's already been banged and leaded and
but it's still super solid. The doors open and close beautifully.
Beautifully is in quotations.
Well, it's not broken in half and the doors like falling off. Yep. It's still a very solid car, but it's not. It's that in between.
Yes.
It's perfectly shitty.
Yes, and I like on some of these cars that they have some quirky things that were customized or done. And what I try and do is like work with what they did and make it work a little better, re-engineer it, or make it a little safer. So, for instance, that car had like a remote cable operated hood set up, and this, the way the radiator was pushed forward a little bit, and all that stuff was very, very crude. I kind of took a lot of time to make it all work again, and now the hood like latches nicely. The cable operates. I made a little slam panel to hold the latches that is solid and tied in. We ended up changing the radiator around so everything fits a little better. And now at least we have a hood that operates correctly. It's the idea they had, and I used some of their bracketry in the hood, just made it a little better and sturdier. So like some of that stuff, they did, and I kept some of it. So when it's done and you look up in it, it's a little crude, but it works. But it doesn't look like it's over-engineered, and I didn't go buy some billet street rod hood pop kit.
Damn it! I was just about to say that.
Yeah, so that's why we picked that car. But for finish, I think that car's ugly. Like the finish on it doesn't have good patina, for lack of a better. So somebody had spot primed all kinds of little spots on it in red, and then it's like a Bahama blue was the paint that was on it. It's like the car just doesn't have a good.
Looks like it has chicken pox.
Yeah, so that car is a good example that. I mean, that one I'm half tempted to just sand all the paint off and put it in, red oxide or gray primer. But in the same breath, it's a lot of effort if I'm going to just, I'm still going to be working on it. So I kind of just left it alone. And I'm just driving it. It's a work in progress. Some of this stuff is your own ego. Can you take it that somebody looks at your car and turns their nose because they don't get it that it's a work in progress? I don't care. So I just enjoy cruising around it. So that one being a work in progress, it's kind of like I'm letting the car speak to me, and I'm going to continue to do modifications on it. But I think if the car gets too ugly, it's not a good example for trying to bring back the age to it. Like we just did the Sedan Delivery. I could tell as soon as I saw the first photos of that car that it was a great candidate for bringing back the original paint. The car's super solid. There's almost no rust at all on it. And when I saw the first couple photos, you could see the sides of the cowl that there was original black paint.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like you're taking... I saw the right signs. You're like, okay, this thing's really solid. You could see where they didn't prime the car, that the paint looks decent. I bet all the paint underneath is probably in good shape. And then when we finally saw the car in person, you could see the primer flaking off, and it's like,
ooh, very shiny black paint.
Yeah, so, and that one proved to be good. So I think that's a good example. Like, the person, I don't know if it was the previous owner or someone before him, like, they were like, instead of just polishing the car up and as is, they were like, oh, this looks better if I spray it in gray primer.
That was a different time, back in the 50s and
True.
60s. The look of just primer may have been more acceptable, yeah.
I guess that's true. But the whole time I'm stripping, I'm like, man, somebody primed over this like beautiful old black paint that you just,
I feel like that's become more of a more accepted look though in the last say 10 or 15 years.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. The market and the hobby has changed where now people are actually it's become a trend when people are faking patina.
Yeah.
They're respraying a whole car and rubbing through the paint on purpose to try and recreate, whether they do it well or they do it poorly. I've seen
most of the time it's poor. Very rarely does it look good. You can tell it's fake.
Yeah, a lot of them, when you're doing a whole car to fake the patina, I agree. I rarely think that it comes off right. I just don't. Every method I see, whether a guy takes a sponge and tries to do it, or they take steel wool and try and scratch through
the sponge one's the worst.
Oh God,
it looks so bad.
So any of those, and if the person's happy, it's great. If that's what
don't listen to us. We're just two idiots sitting on a couch, bullshitting.
But yeah, so that's. But then like back to the, what do you do with the car? How far do you take it? So for me, again, deciding what you want to do with the car, or what you want out of the car, is the answer. So. A lot of these cars, I'm kind of working around, when you deal with an old hot rod or custom survivor car, you're working around the silhouette of the original, what the car was. So if I'm not trying to, I say this a lot, I try not to change the identity of the car. So maybe the car sat a little funny. So like the Skelly Car is a good example. The red 34 sedan we had. Car had a beautiful silhouette. It was done in the 60s. And into the early 70s even, but mainly the 60s. That car, great silhouette. I liked everything about it, but the car sat a little goofy, so they never got around to putting a drop axle in it or taking any leaves or, doing suspension modifications. So like everything else was done. It had a early small block in it, had a kick-ass interior, had a really cool red, Corvette red, for lack of a better term, paint job with the white interior. White garnishment, all the right stuff. Just they never got around to like lowering the car and getting the wheel and tire combo quite right.
If I remember correct, that had all the same size tires all the way around, right?
Yes.
It wasn't staggered yet.
Correct. So, like that was the stuff where it looked good, and I'm sure in its time, a lot of the cars were running around like that. But I think to nail it, all it needed was just a little bit of help there, and that was really all I changed in that car, other than just like dolling up.
Yeah, that's really.
I resprayed like the white garnish molding because the paint was falling off, but I sprayed it the same white again. But like, put a drop axle in it.
And gauges, that's the only thing you changed.
Oh yeah, I did change the gauges just to.
Well, it didn't. It just had stock gauges. It didn't have any aftermarket gauges in it.
Right, and that was just a matter of we were repainting the dash anyways, and it was like, well, that was like the only thing that was still like kind of stock on the car,
Yeah.
and it's like, so those were a couple little tweaks. When the car's done, it still looked like it would have looked, and there were some things I didn't love. Like I'm not really super into the little 3-spoke Superior or Kreger type wheel, but it was what was on the car, so we left it on it, and that's part of the car's identity. You saw the old photos, that was one of the things. So, but we didn't change the identity of that car, so we didn't take that car and then Bonneville hard chop it, and just like put military bucket seats in it and do it like that's like it didn't change the identity. The silhouette was there. We're just enhancing it a little bit, and that's it. So a lot of these cars, that's what we're doing. We're working around. A lot of it is the wheel and tire and the stance of the car. I think is the biggest thing out of all the old customs and hot rods that a lot of people didn't nail, like your average guy.
Yep.
Just because it wasn't as practical back then, maybe, so
They just used what was kicking around.
Yeah, so the Delorean car is a great example. Has an old Dago drop axle on it, has all the right parts, but the car kind of sat not quite how I would like. So we just, took some leaves out, changed the suspension on just a tiny bit, and the wheel and tire combo, I just changed like a size or so, front and rear, and all of a sudden, boom, you get that like not super aggressive slammed, look. We didn't put like VW Beetle front tires on it that are so tiny it's, tucking rim. It's still got that old timey look. It's just if you hold a photo up next to what it looked like then and when I have it now, it's like it just sits a little better. But we retained all the quirkiness. So like the right front fender on that car is a really old repro. And if you ever listen to the interview I did with Jack Delorean, he mentions that when he bought the car, it was the used car lot had an accident or something with it, and it was banged up in the front. And they must have put a repro fender on and stuff, and that fender sits a little lower, so the headlight bar is actually like crooked a little bit when you stare at it, and it sets off my OCD very badly, but I try not to.
So angry with putting that when you bolted all those on for the last time. It's just so aggravating.
So, but again, that's what the car had. At the time when we were putting the car together, I didn't realize it till the very end. And it's like, I probably, if I could have found a fender that matched, I might have changed that. But then I kind of like thought about it. I'm like, all the old photos, you can see it in the photos. It's kind of what it was. So it's like, just live with it. It's not a perfect car. And, when I'm driving the car around, I'm not like, man, when you're in the driver's seat, you're not thinking about that fender.
You can't see that passenger side headlight anyway.
Nope. It's totally fine. So, but that was some of the stuff we're working around, what's on the car and what was done. And,
And that car's a prime example for engine because there was, 3 or 4 different engine mounts. Mm-hmm. And we were curious of what engine and transmission were kind of in that car, and we tried the LaSalle, a shortened LaSalle with a torque tube shortened for its Ford torque tube. You bolted that up to a flathead and tried to put it in to see if everything would jive with the mounts and the Schroll Car too, because that had some different engine mounts in it as well. There were some different things we were looking at to try and change, but the Olds is the only one that fit right in and just sat in there and didn't
kind of just told me what it wanted.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that car had a Y block at some point, but like it seemed like they had cut out or modified some stuff to put the Olds engine in. So it's kind of like, okay, well, that's what it wants. That's what it's telling us. So the DeLorean car, I have a feeling at some point it had an overhead valve engine in its like last iteration, but we couldn't get anything to really line up or match exactly. So
did you leave the mounts in there or did you cut them out?
I left them all in.
I couldn't remember.
Yeah, when you open the hood on that car, there's like the original mounts. There's a mount that we're using, and then there's a mount behind the mount we're using that has another hole in it. So I have a feeling that car had a small block, an early small block in it in its last iteration. But we never took the time to check that 59 AB with the 39 trans kind of just slid right in. And to be honest, I preferred in that car to have a flathead in it just for what I wanted out of the car. So I was kind of happy. Now, if I would have saw a photo of the car with the hood open and Jack had it and it had a small block Chevy in it, I'm not saying I wouldn't have done that. But luckily, from what he told me when he bought it verbally, it had a flathead in it, so we kind of went with that.
And by the time he sold it, there was no overhead valve. It was like a small block Chevy at that point.
Yeah, when he sold it in, because
he sold it in like 50.
Yeah, I guess he sold it in like 53 or 4 is my guess, from kind of understanding from them. So yeah, I guess you're right. The Chevy hadn't come out. No, there could have been olds.
Yeah, it's true.
There could have been Caddy.
Because he bought it in like 51, 52?
Somewhere in there, yeah. And then it might have even been 52 because I think it had 53 Cali plates on it. So I don't know exactly how that worked with how they dated the plates. Like if you registered it in 52, it would have 53 registration on it for when it would expire. And then he sold it in, we don't know, but 53, 4, could have even been 5. But like there's a possibility at some point.
And we don't know, the gentleman that bought it from him could have also been tinkering on it when he bought it and just never told his son that he was.
Yeah.
Because that gentleman had passed long before we ended up with the car.
Right. So we don't, some of the history was lost. And so that's sometimes you let the car speak to you. Just kind of look at it and don't just immediately get a car and strip the paint off and start cutting it up. Like look at the car, kind of study. If it's an old hot rod or custom, of course, what did they do? What were the modifications? Can you see, like for me, the research in the history of the car is as interesting as the car itself. So, and I have a lot of nerdy friends that are like that too. That, like for instance, Matt, Seattle Speed Shop Matt. I was just texting him last night, and he's doing a 32.5 window for a customer that's an old hot rod, and he's telling me how like all these little nerdy. He's like, I don't know if the dash is the one that was in the car when it was built because it's like a stock dash with no holes cut in it and stock gauges and all this stuff. And he's like, and everything else in the car was like modified. And it's like, yeah, you're probably right. It might have been swapped out at some point. And there's different little things like that. So like he's getting into those little details. He found chrome welting on the in between the fenders and stuff. And it's like somebody put, instead of the black stuff, somebody put chrome on, so the car's been apart. So it's like, so it's neat finding all that little details, and that kind of guides you in what to do with the car a lot of times. But yeah, I mean, a lot of times it's just when we start digging into the car, I kind of figure out what we want to do with it. But if the car has at this point, these cars, it's so sacred to have a survivor old hot rod that if the car has good age to it, it's kind of a shame. And it doesn't monetarily make sense to strip it all down and change its identity or redo it. Now, I know in the higher end hot rod world, there's a lot of guys doing it. So you look at a lot of the cars that are in the high end collections that are like cover cars. Those cars are restored to a point of beyond probably nicer than they ever were.
Yep.
But that seems to be more acceptable, I guess you could say. I don't know. It seems to be that.
And I think some of those guys are looking at it more of an investment.
I think a lot of those guys just want they want the car how it was when it was built, and I could totally respect that. And you can't deny that when it's, when Brizzio's doing the restoration on this car, it's going to be as good or better than it was new.
It'll definitely be better.
So, like, I can't deny that those cars look amazing. But sometimes I think there's cars that had a really good age to them that they could have been preserved. Now, a good example of that is the Cookie T. That car did not look like the Cookie T that we all know.
And love.
It was its later age. It was like Elvis in Vegas.
Fat and bloated.
Yeah, it's just it was Elvis. The glasses were the same. Yeah. The sideburns were there, But everything else is just like, I don't know. And you like kind of have to love it because it was the cookie tea, but also it's if
The
it
Jim
wasn't
Street version, yeah.
you're like, it's terrible. It's the last Jim Street version. So I think some of his first iterations weren't as bad, but the final version when it was sitting there and found, not so great.
No.
So like that car, great example. That car, I think that was the fitting thing because the version that it wasn't really great. And I think what they did with the car is what it looked like. And it's, when it was running around, although it's probably way nicer, but still, it's what it was running. All the old photos where we see it, Norm's drag racing against Ivo and stuff.
Yeah.
Like, that's those black and white photos, you're like, that's what that thing probably looked like. So that car is a good example of, I think it made sense in that. But then there's some other ones that like they redo them and are like, I don't know, that car, everything was there. It had cool paint. Like probably could have just preserved the car and it would have been
just as cool.
And don't get me wrong, it's still great, but I don't know. That's where I always struggle with that. And there's some of these collections where they have, Three Dog and Peterson and Schutten's got, at the Galpin stuff, like they have some survivor cars floating around in their collections. These are the high-end collections I'm talking about, that they have a little bit of both. So I'm not saying that any of those people don't have great survivor cars, because all of those, that's just three of the biggest collections I'm naming. But like those collections have great survivor cars. So it's like, it's in the end of the day, it's everybody's opinion on what you want to do with it. But I'm glad to think that people are thinking twice nowadays about just stripping a car down and sometimes preserving the age or the whatever to the car. So, but I don't know. I think when somebody's buying a car and changing its identity, that's where I like cringe a little bit.
Yeah, we see it all the time on Facebook with people new to the hobby. They get a car and they post in the Facebook group, "Hey, I just got this great black, whatever, hot rod, old original car, and I'm going to strip all the paint off and we're going to do a patina paint on it." It's like, it's got nice black paint now. Why would you strip it all down to make it like rusty looking? It's annoying to see, but they own the car, so there's nothing you can do about it.
And that kind of reminds me, how many times have we and I see it on like the Ham, and you see it on these Facebook groups, and we run into it a lot with our business, where a family member inherits a kick-ass old customer hot rod, and they are not nostalgic hot rod and custom people, so they'll get this car that's bitching, and then they will be like, yeah, I'm going to pull all that and put a 302 Ford in it because a Ford, and it's like...
I mean, that's my nailhead.
True.
That's how my nailhead came from a guy that inherited his dad's, I think it was a 32 3-window.
No, it was a...
I think it was a 32 3-window with a LaSalle, that nailhead and a LaSalle transmission.
I think it was a cabriolet. But anyways, I don't remember.
He decided he wanted to put a small block Chevy in it and ripped that nailhead out and sold it to the gentleman that I bought it from. And he took his dad's whole car apart just to put a small block Chevy in it. And he could have just kept it. The engine was known running. The car ran and drove. And he just ripped it out to put a small block in. It's like you had a great car, nailhead with a LaSalle. It just sounds so kick-ass. And then you had to put a small block in it.
And yeah, sometimes the modifications they're making isn't, at the end of the day, that isn't dad's or grandpa's hot rod anymore. You just change the identity so much, but they changed the wheels and it's happened a lot at estates that we've bought the parts from the family, and I feel terrible about it, and you kind of want to talk them out of it, but sometimes it's too late. There's one in Virginia, very, very nice people, but they had their father's 40 Ford Coupe he had forever, and he drag raced it and had all these stories of running, it was a rum runner car before his dad had it, and all this stuff. And then he's redoing the car now that he owns it, and he ripped the Columbia rear out of it. He ripped the 303 olds, the Ford Trans out of it, and all the old stuff. And
he four-linked it and did a bunch of goofy.
Not goofy, he just changed the style of the car. He's turning it into a street rod or a pro touring or a pro street kind of car when that wasn't Dad's hot rod. So like all the memories and stories that you're telling people about the car, it's not really Dad's car anymore. I mean, yes, the bones are there, but like by changing
The soul
all that,
isn't.
yeah, like so all that stuff kind of is gone. So like that was one where by the time we already got there, everything was, they had already started
blasted and stripped.
Yeah, and they were already like we helped them pull the engine, but they had kind of like already done a lot of that themselves, and so it was like I was happy to buy the stuff, but like it was to me it felt like a little bit of a shame. So we see that quite often, and I like on now a lot of times on groups, Facebook groups, or even the ham I've seen over the years where like everybody just like piles on trying to like talk them out of it. You're like, just think twice. Think about the car first. You don't need to do this. And like people will try and talk sense into them, into a family member. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I always hate that when it's like, you're like, man, that was a cool ass car. And they just like.
Probably the best piece of advice from this podcast is if you get a car, don't dive head first into it in the first 30 seconds of owning it.
Yeah.
Sit and just look at it for a little bit and really think and reflect on what you want to do with it, where you want to go with it, instead of just getting it home and just instantly blowing it into a million pieces or sanding all the paint off of it.
Yeah, because it's like in those instances with the families, it's like keep Dad's, grandpa's, or whoever's car how it kind of was, because that's what you're doing it for the nostalgia sake. So why not keep the car nostalgic? And if you want to build a car that's just like it, that's a street rod, build another one. And then you can have two cars. And then you can have the car. I built one how Dad might have built it in 1976 instead of 1947. You know, like, so some of that stuff, it's like, I don't keep the story of the car and the history of it is kind of lost again, back to the Brookville Roadster thing we were talking about. Like when you park that 40 Ford that's totally redone and looks like a street rod somewhere, telling the story of how it was Dad's rum runner car and this and that, and they drag race to here and that, and you're like, okay, well, it just looks like every other Pro Street 40 Ford or whatever.
It's like inheriting your dad's hand-built log cabin and then tearing all the walls down and building a new house on it and be like, yeah, my dad hand-built this cabin.
Yeah, that's such a great
and then I tore it all down and just built a new house on top of it. But my dad hand-built what was here.
All that's left is the foundation.
Yeah.
You're like, yeah, my dad hand-built the log cabin here, but now it's a prefab home.
Yeah, it's all
whitewashed.
Modern, yeah.
Yeah, so that's what you're doing, folks.
It took me 50 minutes to come up with that analogy.
That was good. I only need one good one.
Yeah.
But that's a great, it's just, that's a,
do you agree, Moon?
Hey. Yeah, so that's a good, perfect analogy of that. That's at that point it doesn't matter anymore. So build two cars. That's my great advice. Build multiple cars.
Yeah,
everybody
keep your dad's car and then build what you actually want from a different car.
Yeah, and it's like inspired by.
Yeah, and I mean, the more the merrier, right?
Yeah, everybody needs multiple cars. At least two, if not 10. But at least two. That's
1, 2, 3, 4.
We don't want to count.
Yeah.
But you definitely, that's part of it. But yeah, I think if you're trying to figure out what you're going to do with your project car or how far to take it, you need to have that conversation with yourself in the beginning of what you want to have out of the vehicle. That's the Cliff Notes version is that, and think about it, and that will kind of get you, to a decision of what you should buy. But patience is the hardest thing in this whole hobby, and I find myself struggling with it even to this day. But
it literally just happened like a week ago. That Model A pickup that we bought. You were like, I think we're gonna pull the engine out and do a bunch of stuff to it right away, and then like 2 days later, you're like, let's just wait. I have other stuff that I want to work on that's more important, or let's put it on the back burner for right now.
Yeah, I have that's a bad thing with me is that we get a new project, and I love turning a car around very quickly. So I love that idea of taking that thing and in a couple weeks or a month having it like totally going in the direction that we would like it to go in. So again, that one, I like what our friend Jamie was doing with it. I would just change the direction a little bit on it. But I was like, oh man, we can do this and do that, and we could change some stuff, and then, next thing we know, we'll have this thing running and driving. It's like, well, in between there was like 100 hours of work, and I'm like, I probably have other cars
the Sweetheart Roadster is forgotten. Once again.
Yeah. So I have some other cars that I really would like to work on ahead of it. So it's like, let's just let that car simmer. It was a good deal, so it's not like we're in super deep money wise. So we're just gonna, hold on to it and let it speak to me. But I think when we get the time, or we get a lull in our projects, the time will come. I mean, we're in a very unique situation where we need to produce content and work on vehicles to produce content. So if there is a lull, or we sell a car or two, or something happens where we're waiting on parts, well, then we can drag that one over and start working on it. Or if there's a reason that we have some interest or excuse to work on it, then we will.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, that's kind of our broad ramblings about what to do with a car. So hopefully some of this resonated with you.
Hopefully it guides you in your choices for building a hot rod or a custom.
Or just that old car that you're, any old car that you're buying.
True.
Try and decide what you want to do with it. That's why I mentioned about the Chevelle thing. Or a 50s car is a good example. You see people that want to, they want a two-door, but they want a 59 Cadillac two-door. And then they go and buy a 1976 four-door Cadillac. And it's like, it's not the same car. So you should have just waited. So that's, I think that it can be used in any type of collector car world. I think this whole mindset and patience thing could be applied to. So that's all we have for this one, for our audio podcast.
Yeah, if there's any topics you'd like us to chit chat about, send us an email or a message on social media. We love all recommendations to help continue doing this, because it's a fun conversation. And sometimes there's people bring questions to us that, we never really thought about it that way, or it sparks a really, really good discussion.
Yes, sir. So thank you guys for listening. We appreciate it, and we'll catch you on the next one.
See you.